Hello and welcome to episode 358 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with...
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. How are you?
Hello, Jason. I'm doing well. Welcome back to the studio.
Thank you.
It's been lonely without you.
Aw, thank you. But you and Ned held down a fantastic show last week. It was a little echoey. I'm pretty sure Ned recorded inside like an engine testing chamber of some sort.
He was literally... I found this out after we recorded. I was wondering, like, he goes, it's the only room I can find by myself. And he ended up recording in, I guess, a tiled room.
I could tell.
I was like, why?
I was a little impressed by the audio coming off my phone from the roof of the resort outside an airport with music and wind playing. So that was pretty cool.
That was pretty nice.
Yeah, but here we are.
Not jealous at all.
No, I'm not bringing that up for any particular reason. But here we are at episode 358, the A350-800 episode, which I guess if we were going by that note, it shouldn't exist at all. So that's a wrap. That doesn't
exist.
Yep, that's it.
Oh, man. What could have been and never will be.
Yes.
But we do have a good episode to get through today. A lot has happened in the past week.
Off vacation, starting to pay attention to things again. Had a nice time there. Nice, easy flight back, thankfully, which you never know going to Newark. So
that's
happy
true.
to have had a completely frictionless flight home, except for the bus/walk to your airplane gates at St. Martin. It's like the seventh circle of hell down there. But the rest of the airport, which I guess is worth a mention too, the rest of the airport that has been completely rebuilt since the hurricane.
That's true.
Is fan-freaking-tastic. It's just once you go downstairs to one of the non-jet bridge equipped gates, of which there are only 4, it is like nothing has ever happened down there at all. It is dreadful. But the rest of the airport...
They tell you to go to the basement when the storm comes, and the basement held. Unfortunately for passengers.
Yes. Yeah. But the rest of the airport, if you haven't been, it is completely redone from the departures hall to check-in to security, immigration. They've really gone all in on biometrics and e-gates and all that, which was actually kind of fascinating and worth a mention in and of itself. The security lines had to be periodically completely stopped, and they wouldn't process anyone through security because humans have a tendency to not follow directions. And once everyone flowed through security and got to the automatic passport control gates, things slowed down dramatically. So it's one of those fun situations where the airport authorities spent a lot of money and a lot of time planning to do something great and have everyone flow through immigration automatically really quickly, but then learn the hard way that people don't read words on a screen. And when it doesn't work the way they expect, people don't know what to do. And then they just stand there. So it was very interesting to see security having to be halted a number of times because people can't read directions. But that was
one day.
The rest of the airport is now fantastic, except for the bus gates or walking. I actually like the fact that I could walk to my airplane and didn't need a bus gate. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Don't get much of that.
At warm weather airports, Caribbean airports and other consistently warm and nice climates, I always enjoy that open air walk to the airplane.
Yeah, like your plane's over there, just go get to it. I hope it's not raining or downpouring like it can and very often does in the Caribbean, because that would
As long as you're not departing mid-afternoon, you're usually okay.
Oh, so the time when all of the airplanes go out. So no big deal. Yeah, okay. Not sure what they did in that scenario. Thankfully, it was the moment Jeremy left, it became very sunny and very nice, very warm, no rain at all. So everything worked out great.
He always takes the clouds with him. Well,
thank you.
Thank you for dialing in last week. It sounded like you had a lot of fun. And if you didn't listen to last week's episode, I highly suggest you go back and
even
at least listen to the segment. I mean, there's a third time for everything, I think.
Yeah.
And listen to Jason and Jeremy chat about the approach into St. Bart's and the ride on the Trilander. So very cool stuff. Ned and I last week began the show talking about the incident in El Paso, Texas, where the FAA made a instant closure of the airspace that was originally scheduled to last 10 days. And we talked about how we walked through some of the rationale behind this, and I made conjecture that this was a attention-seeking move by the FAA administrator in order to really hammer home the point that the use of anti-drone weaponry by the government. And as it turns out, it wasn't the DoD, it was the Customs and Border Protection. Use of that weaponry without coordination by the FAA is not good. And it turns out that that's the case. However, the story gets even more ridiculous in the sense that the anti-drone weaponry was not being used against a drone. It was being used against a misidentified party balloon.
And I think that might be the straw that broke the camel's back here with the FAA and DOT, that not only was CBP or DoD, whomever, using a high energy laser weapon to shoot down something even before the FAA DOT had a chance to completely vet that technology and secure the airspace, but they were shooting down something that they didn't actually know for certain what it was, which is kind of mind-boggling because we know what happens when you shoot weapons at things that you don't fully understand what they are, and that's how you end up shooting down civilian airliners. We have seen that a number of times in the not too recent past, unfortunately, and I'd very much like the US to not do that again, especially not in its own airspace against one of its own civilian airliners, which would be really, really not great. So you know what? The FAA and the DOT, they did a powerful move. They used their authority to do the maximum amount of hand waving, and I guess it was just a power move saying, you know what, if you don't want to work with us, if you're not going to wait for us to approve this thing and make sure it's completely safe, we're going to make sure that nothing flies. And that's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, I think the New York Times put out an article breaking down to the best of what they could figure out what happened. And this does seem to very much be the case, that the lines of communication between the forces that wanted to use a high energy laser weapon and the entities that control the airspace were not communicating with each other, or it wasn't enough communication. And since this administration came into power, the lines of communication that would ordinarily be in place have degraded significantly. That's not me saying that. That's the New York Times saying that. I don't know. But I would certainly believe that. And you know what? If there are dangerous weapons out there being shot into the sky, shooting down misidentified objects, I think the FAA did exactly what it should have done and done the most publicly acknowledgeable thing in its toolkit, I think. And there's nothing more powerful than saying, no airplanes for anyone for 10 days. Sorry about that.
Yeah. And a reminder that that 10-day window was purposeful. The meeting that was scheduled to take place to discuss the coordination of the use of these weapons in that airspace was scheduled for the day before the NOTAM was set to expire. The 10 days wasn't just a pick a number. It was very purposeful to get the attention.
They sent a message.
Basically force that meeting.
They sent a message.
That's exactly what
was received loud and clear. And hopefully this won't happen again. Man, this was crazy. All sorts of jumping to conclusion was had about what this TFR meant, what were the potential outcomes of it. It turns out it was just stupid from top to bottom. And none of this should have happened.
I'm just going to put that, this isn't aviation related, but just generally helium balloons, just be careful. Be careful with your helium balloons, especially those Mylar ones. Just generally speaking, for all sorts of aviation reasons, but also they harm animals and they're not good for the environment. So just be careful with your Mylar balloons, all right?
Yeah, in general, we shouldn't be using helium for balloons anyway, but you know.
And way off topic rant. Let's get back to what is an absolutely crazy story here that happened to United Flight 613 earlier this week. Diversions are not uncommon. There are diversions every day for medical reasons, technical reasons, all sorts of things. And even passengers going into labor on board an aircraft is not entirely unheard of. We usually hear about it maybe once or twice a year. And so this week, a passenger aboard United Flight 613 from Lagos to Washington Dulles went into labor. They were just passing Dakar in Senegal. They turned around. They made an emergency landing in Dakar. They removed the woman from the aircraft, took her to hospital. And as far as we know, everyone's doing great. But that put them a few hours behind schedule. So United realizing that the crew was going to time out and would not be able to make it all the way to Dulles, decided that the best course of action would be to return the aircraft and the crew and the passengers to Lagos, so that if folks are leaving from Lagos, they can go home for the night. If they're not going to be able to get a flight out, United operates daily flights there. They'll be able to accommodate passengers better. It's a much better situation for everyone because United has resources there to be able to handle the regular operations. Makes perfect sense. So they decide to go back to Lagos. En route back to Lagos, an elderly passenger loses consciousness.
Oh boy.
And needs medical attention and became unresponsive. And the airline was not able or did not confirm what happened to the passenger on board. However, we later learned that that passenger did pass. So just a all around incredibly wonderful on one hand, because healthy twins being born, incredibly sad on the other, because someone has now died, and just a very stressful day for that poor flight crew.
Yeah, and that aircraft is only now on its way back to Dulles, finally. I assume that's where it's going. It's now operating as United 613 Delta, so I assume there are probably 2 United 613 flights operating as we speak, but it spent an unexpected couple of days there on the ground in Africa. Yikes. When it rains, it pours, I guess.
Yeah. So good on them for getting on off to Dulles, but just, I mean, an awful situation all around.
Yeah, going back to Lagos was almost certainly the right decision. It sucks to fly all the way from Lagos to the west coast of Africa only to turn back around. But if they weren't going to make it to Dulles, crossing the Atlantic Ocean, there aren't too many United hubs along the way between Senegal and Dulles. So if the crew was going to time out, there's nowhere else to go. So it does make sense instead of dumping everyone out in Senegal, which in Dakar, I think United used to have service there, but no longer does.
They used to have service. That was the pair when they canceled Dakar and Stockholm at the same time. That was
so that was personal to you. I see.
Slightly. Yeah, it's just I remember they canceled those at the same time.
Yes, but you always want to return the aircraft to somewhere you have ground handling contracts and fuel contracts and terminal space, so it makes sense to go back. And that's probably exactly why an ANA flight had a 14-hour flight to nowhere recently. Did you see this one?
I sure did. Followed that one in real time going, oh no, as they turned around.
So rough and difficult to explain, especially if this ANA flight was between Tokyo Haneda and Frankfurt, Germany, I believe, which is quite a long flight. It's about 14 hours. But this flight was 14 hours from Tokyo Haneda to Tokyo Haneda, which, ouch.
Yeah. I mean, it's up there as one of the longest origin destination
returns out there.
Yeah, returns. I think that the Auckland to Auckland flight is still a little bit longer. I think that ended up being 16
Was that the one that was coming
hours?
to JFK? Because I would very much like JFK to remain in the top #1 position of most nonsensical return flights because we're special.
Exactly.
We deserve it. But those are, I remember that one. That was tough because it wasn't even a daily flight.
Was it the snowstorm that closed JFK?
It was a snowstorm, or like a whole bunch of things happened at once, and then
the terminal lost power.
The terminal lost power. It was a bad week here, and then they took off. They got delayed again, or another flight canceled because of rain in Auckland. It was compounding issues. But this flight, an ANA 787-9 in Star Alliance livery, man, 14 hours from Haneda to Haneda. We don't exactly know why. Reports are that there was an engine oil temperature warning. But of course, the question is always going to be, if it was just as long to get back to Tokyo, as it was to get to Germany, why didn't they just continue on to Germany? Well, this is a polar flight, isn't it? Or damn near it.
Yes. And this is one of those things where there are so many things that go into why this routing, why turn around, why go back to Tokyo. Because in the before 2022 times, this flight would fly over Russia.
This flight would have gone the entirely opposite direction.
Exactly. So then you would have an aircraft that's flying over Russia. And then if this had happened there, you would have probably seen a diversion to somewhere like Irkutsk or Novosibirsk, or depending on how far along you got, maybe Moscow or something like that. But because ANA doesn't use Russian airspace, because they're not allowed to use Russian airspace, because Japan said Russia can't use its airspace, you have the aircraft flying along the eastern border of Russian airspace, basically between Alaska and Russia, and then following what's a polar route from the west coast of Alaska over northern Canada, Greenland, and then down into Europe. And so at this point, where they turned around north of Alaska, so it was a few hundred miles off the northern coast of Alaska, at that point, they're entering a portion of airspace where there aren't really any good. I mean, if there's a catastrophic failure of the engine, there are plenty of places they can land, thanks to ETOPS. But if they want to get the aircraft back somewhere where they can fix it, they can take care of the passengers easily, they don't need to send out rescue aircraft or anything like that, that was the place to turn around. Because if they had gone much further, it would have been a much bigger issue. So it's one of those things where geopolitics compounds technical feasibility, compounds operational prudence.
Yeah, I'm happy they did what they did, because at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for all parties involved. And especially for the passengers, yeah, 14 hours from Tokyo to Tokyo sucks, but they get back to Tokyo. You could have those passengers offloaded and put on a new plane and on their way in maybe 90 minutes. I don't know if anyone wants to do that, because that would mean basically 28 hours on a plane. And even ANA, I don't want to be doing that even in business class. But that's a much better option than having an emergency diversion to the Northwest Territories or somewhere where they're going to get on the ground and say, well, damn, now what do we do?
Exactly. So the flight departed slightly late, and they arrived in Frankfurt with a delay of about 20 hours. So, oof. But
ouch.
I
hope to never be on one of these flights that even eclipses or gets near the top 10 of longest origin to origin flights, because I feel so bad for everyone. A 14-hour flight is bad enough, but to have to do it 1.5 times. No, really 2 times. Oof.
That's the other thing. When you think about this, is obviously you want to get to where you're going as quickly as possible. And I'm sure at the time everyone was relieved because they were able to quickly get back on a different aircraft and make it to Frankfurt. But also, oof, that's 28 hours on an airplane.
No better place than Japan to end up back on a flight that didn't quite work. Because I'm sure when they blocked into a gate at Haneda, they were met with dozens of employees, all ready, willing, and able to help, which is just certainly not going to be the case with all airlines at all destinations. We've had
stories of aircraft returning and there just being no one there.
Hey, man, that's your problem, not mine. You departed. My job here is done. But no, at Haneda, I would fully expect everyone to be dealt with very, very quickly and very, very efficiently. Or not. Japan's weird that way.
Let's hope that because they got off so quickly, then that's exactly what happened. Let's go to, actually, we're going back to Nigeria, because an Arik Air 737-700 experienced an uncontained engine failure in its number one CFM56 engine. So the left-hand side of the aircraft. Photos, and we'll put a link in the show notes, show the engine cowling barely still attached and crumpled like a piece of aluminum foil.
Yeah, not great. No, you can also see exactly in the ADS-B data when this happened.
Yeah. So thankfully, no one was injured. What we're learning now, though, is that the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer was also damaged. They are finding new structural damage as they investigate further. This aircraft was 5 November Mike Juliet Fox, and we'll put a link in the show notes to this particular flight.
Yeah.
But again, thankfully, no one was injured.
They're tough, man.
We've
seen this a number of times where something catastrophic happens on board that damages the horizontal stabilizer, and you look at it and say, how the hell did that thing keep flying? And sure enough, it did.
It kept going. And, there's that one video. Is it from an AirTran 737 from years and years and years ago where the engine, nothing bad happened to the engine, but the engine cowling wasn't latched completely. So it ended up flapping in the slipstream.
That's happened a number of times. BA comes to mind for some reason.
Yeah. And so I think these things, even when they break, they're still incredibly strong. But this particular cowling is just folded. So whatever happened, a loud bang was heard. Yes, loud indeed. But thankfully, the aircraft landed safely.
I love the photo pulled in from Jet Photos has fireworks in the background because it's a very dramatic photo for a very dramatically damaged aircraft. I have a soft spot in my heart for Arik Air because they used to operate the JFK with leased A340-500s, which were just beautiful aircraft. So as not great as this airline might be in its current iteration, I miss seeing it.
Yeah, well, hopefully one day, Jason, you'll get to see it again.
No, not happening.
Let's head to Brazil, where a LATAM 777-300ER this week experienced a rejected takeoff above V1, which is not unheard of, but incredibly rare. So V1 being the speed at which the decision speed
that anymore.
No, at which the pilots are committed to taking off. It is at that speed at which you cannot ensure that there is enough runway available to stop if you have to. You're committed to the takeoff. In this particular case, visual evidence from the airport, someone was live streaming, shows the nose wheel coming off the ground before the pilots rejected the takeoff and slammed on the brakes.
The nose wheel came off. I watched this video, but I actually did not notice that.
So 178 knots over the ground, about 9/16 of the way down the runway.
But who's counting?
I counted a little. They slammed on the brakes and went from 178 knots to 0 knots before they needed to turn off at the end of the runway onto the taxiway. They made it all the way onto the taxiway before they stopped, and all of the brakes just said, nope, we are done. Thankfully, the airport rescue firefighters were on scene very quickly and were able to take care of any hot, very, very hot brakes.
Interesting. So I'm playing back the video now, and I don't quite see when the nose comes off the ground, but maybe I just don't know the exact moment that happened. It probably did at some point, but there's some variability to the V1 speed, especially since in this case it was nice out, the runway wasn't contaminated, it wasn't wet, wasn't covered in snow, and they seemed to end up having plenty might not be the right word, but there was room there at the end.
There was enough room to safely slow down. And we'll put a link in the show notes to the playback where you can see the aircraft goes from slamming on the brakes to this
gentle
seems more
taxi.
Of a yeah, exactly. We're
when I'm playing back the video, it's very, very, very bright coming off the aircraft when they are slowly taxiing off the runway. I'm like, oh no, are they on fire? Is this a fire? And then they turn to the left a little bit and, oh no, it's just lens flare from the landing lights on the aircraft. And then they go
Yes, J.J. Abrams was filming the
so
departure.
much lens flare. But then the aircraft continues to taxi, and then you end up seeing the main landing gear and you go, oh wait, it is actually glowing hot steel or brake pads or whatever material it is. It's not quite on fire there, but is really unhappy and is going to have to be replaced.
Yeah.
Everything in this case worked as it's supposed to. When the brakes get really, really hot and the tires get really, really hot, they have mechanisms in place to not explode. They deflate, which is nice.
Nice fuse plug.
Yes, fuse plug. Is PT back in service already?
It is not back in service. No, I think it's going to be out of service for quite some time because I think there's probably some structural investigation that needs to happen. And I think they also need to replace a whole bunch of tires and wheels.
Mm-hmm. Well, at least they're at their home base.
There you go.
They're not in Haneda.
And they didn't fly for 14 hours only for that to happen. Let's come back closer to home and talk about just a little bit the NTSB's final report on the midair collision between the PSA Airlines CRJ 700 and the U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter. We talked about the NTSB's findings when the NTSB held its probable cause hearings a few weeks ago. The final report is now out. I just wanted to flag that the full report is long. It is, I think, let me just double check. I want to say 388 pages on the page numbering, and the PDF itself is 419 pages. What the report does very well is lay out the chain of events as the NTSB sees it that led to the midair collision. And it doesn't just focus on the events of that night. It takes a much wider systemic view and says that all of these factors contributed to the events of that night even being possible, and does it in a very meticulous manner. But also, I think really worth reading are the safety recommendations that are targeted at the FAA, that are targeted at the U.S. Army, and that are targeted at some organizations I didn't even know existed before the hearings into this crash. I mean, there are safety recommendations that are geared towards the Department of War Policy Board on Federal Aviation.
Sure, heard of them before.
And a few others that are specifically helicopter focused, and we generally don't cover that here. But worth reading at least the overview on the NTSB's investigations page if you don't want to slog through the 400-page report, though we will put a link to all of that in the show notes.
If you do want to hear the whole 400-something page report, let us know, because Ian will read it to you before bedtime.
I will, absolutely. Working on the audiobook now as we speak. Jason.
Yes?
In long lead times for changes to federal aviation, we are no strangers. We know that things take time.
That's true. Where are you going with this?
I'm going with secondary barriers for flight deck doors. This is a post-September 11th, 2001 regulatory effort that was intended to make flight decks safer and prevent any similar style attacks. It was pushed through, and then nothing happened for decades. Finally, last year, the FAA said, okay, we're actually going to require this now. And so aircraft manufactured after August of 2025 are now required to have this. Alaska Air's subsidiary Horizon Air now says we need more time. And they're asking the FAA for another year to comply.
That's it? Just a year?
Just a year.
I mean, Horizon only flies the one type, right? Only the E-175. So, okay. Is there even a product available for the E-175 to do this?
Right. So what they're saying is that because of the galley configuration on the Horizon Air E-175s, the barrier that is currently certified for the E-175 won't work.
Sure. So back to using galley carts as a barrier?
So the rule doesn't even take effect until August 2026 because the A4A and the Regional Airline Association said, well, we need more time. And so the FAA pushed it back a year already. And now Horizon's saying we need another year.
Why bother?
It's the galley instead of a wardrobe at the front of the aircraft that has created some problems. So Embraer is modifying the barrier so that it'll work on Horizons, but then they have to receive regulatory approval, and then they have to be able to install it across the fleet.
Okay, sure. Why not? This is how many decades down the line are we?
I'm not sure why they didn't know about this a year ago or 2 years ago, but here we are.
Yeah, old rules die hard. I mean, just a couple months ago here in New York, there was a state bill passed through that was so old and so immediately drafted after 9/11 that for some reason just got kicked around, and finally went all the way to the governor's desk in 2025 before it was vetoed about mandating having multiple crew members on board a train, which I'm not going to get into the details of that, but it was a regulation that was drafted in probably November of 2001 and almost became law in December 2025. And this is very, very similar trajectory to what we're seeing here with these barriers on board aircraft, where no airline wants to do this. And if there's any opportunity they could take to make it not happen, or take an extra year or an extra couple of years, they're going to take that up. Because does anyone really think this is still necessary?
The FAA does, apparently.
Oh, do they? Or do lawmakers who potentially pass this law think it's necessary?
I'm just here for the galley instead of the wardrobe. That's all I'm saying.
It's an important distinction.
I think so. I've seen a lot of reporting about this week, and all of it sounds breathless in its coverage, where it's, I can't believe this is happening. And I'm sitting here going, this is a good idea.
Is it?
I think it is.
I mean, it can still be a good idea and make you sad at the same time, right?
I'm trying not to become emotionally attached to inanimate objects. However, I see the sense there. But I think the breathlessness of it is that people are surprised that this is happening. And given everything that's happened with the A320neo family, and especially the Pratt & Whitney geared turbofan engines, this cannot possibly be a surprise. What is happening is a company called AirTrade, EIR, Trade.
An Irish company. Who would have guessed?
Yeah, surprise. They are stripping 2 former Spirit A320neo aircraft for parts. They are taking, especially the engines.
Certainly you meant CEO aircraft.
No, I do not. These are Neo aircraft. These are A320neo aircraft.
And there you go. That's why people are all up in arms here, because this is a 3.6-year-old aircraft.
However, no one's flying them. You can pick them up for relatively cheap if you know where to look. And Goodyear, Arizona is a great place to look for them right now. And everybody has been complaining about the fact that you can't get parts for these aircraft. Well, this is what we're going to do. And so Bill Thompson, who's the vice president for America's Origination and Trading. Side note, aircraft lessors and leasing companies and just aircraft MRO companies have, bar none, the best job titles. They just come up with some great job titles.
Yeah, it's a pretty good business card.
Bill Thompson says, quote, "We are focused on newer vintage aircraft to ensure that our inventory contains the highest quality rotables, which ensure that our customers, rotables, yes.
Which ensure engine?
Why use a simple word when a fun word can suffice?
What the hell is a rotable?"
He continues, which ensure that our customers can be supported with the latest modification standard components. So,
in English, these planes got engines. People need engines. Now we got 4 of them.
Yes. So rotables refer to the stuff that's really expensive and can be moved from aircraft to aircraft. So we're talking about the engines, which is a huge thing when we're talking about any Pratt & Whitney geared turbofan engines, landing gears, which are extremely expensive to replace, as well as avionics and other components. So those things are going to be made available to customers so that they can continue operating their fleets. Because otherwise, these aircraft were just going to be sitting around in the desert.
Yeah, this is brutal. One of these 2 aircraft had its very first flight, July 15th, 2022, according to Plane Spotters. It was withdrawn from service May 2nd, 2025. It didn't even make 3 years in service, which is just nuts for this kind of very, very in-demand aircraft. But Spirit has declared bankruptcy twice since then, so it kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Jason, I think we can be sad this is happening for a variety of reasons, not just to these particular aircraft, but I don't think that this should surprise anyone.
No, it shouldn't be surprising to anyone who's been paying any attention, especially now. I am looking forward is the wrong term, but very much interested to see what happens with Airbus and Boeing and Embraer and everyone else with the components apocalypse that's coming for us because AI is eating all of the components that you need to build computers. How long is Airbus and Boeing and Embraer and everyone else going to be able to buy the RAM and the SSDs and the everything else that you need to put into an airplane to make it fly? That's going to catch up to us sooner rather than later, all in the name of AI. So, yeah.
That sounds like a conference paper that somebody's about to give soon.
Ooh, we could be the people who draft that paper. No, that's not us. We just talk about it. But it's going to happen. And those components, the avionics in this 3.6-year-old aircraft, they're going to become probably worth their weight more so than gold. Not all that far in the future. And there's a gold mine out there in Goodyear, Arizona. And it's yellow. They're all yellow.
So, Jason, I think we've gotten off on a side topic, but speaking of like good names and things like that, do you prefer Ramageddon or the Rampocalypse?
Rampocalypse is my personal preference.
All right. Good to know. I'm leaning towards Ramageddon, but podcast at fr24.com if you have a preference.
Or if you have any, cheap RAM.
If you're willing to sell it, yes.
We'd be willing to resell it to Airbus.
There you go. So I just went off saying, this shouldn't have been surprising. But the story that kind of surprised me this week was that Air Canada ordered 8 A350-1000s.
Out of nowhere.
And they're going to replace the oldest A330s.
Yes, the A350-1000 is a significantly larger aircraft than the A330. And when this was first announced, I put it out there on Blue Sky and people replied saying, surely you are wrong. You are an idiot. These are actually to replace the 777s. And in fact, no, Air Canada explicitly stated they are to replace the A330s and later clarified again that, hey, our 777s ain't all that old and they're not going anywhere through the 2030s. These are to replace the A330s, which is a hell of an increase in seat density and size of aircraft.
It's like a whole other airplane.
Yeah, A330. Does Air Canada have the 300s, I think? The A350-1000? That's a massive increase, which is good because Air Canada is extremely short on aircraft to run a competent operation.
Well, that's
whole other podcast.
Part of it. Yeah. I mean, that's certainly part of it. But their argument is the A350-1000 opens up, and this is to replace some of their oldest A330s, 300s. So they have a tranche of preteens, and then they've got some teenagers, and then they have some that are approaching, by the time these aircraft are delivered, they will be 30 years old. So those will be certainly ready for retirement by the time the A350-1000s are delivered. But what Air Canada has said is that, hey, look, this will allow us to much better serve some of the routes that we have A330s on at the moment, but it also allows us to redeploy capacity to other new destinations by the time we get there. So that'll be interesting to see where we start to see Air Canada flying from with the A350-1000s. And I know there's all sorts of speculation already. Yes, the vaunted Toronto-Newark A350-1000 route.
I mean, there's a Vancouver-Newark 7879 route, so they put their
that
biggest,
makes sense.
fattest aircraft.
I don't think Toronto.
Something's going on at Newark right now. Nothing's going in or out. We'll figure that out later. But this is what happens when I pull up Flight Radar 24 and I look at Newark. Something breaks.
Something bad is always happening.
Aircraft emergency, says the FAA. Who knows what that means, though? Could mean nothing.
Usually, but we'll see. Let's move on to this article from The Guardian, where an artist is accusing AirAsia of using his mural on an aircraft livery without getting consent.
Don't do that. Art is not something you should reproduce without permission, I guess. This is a weird one because we love special liveries. We love seeing special liveries. We love when airlines do special liveries. But usually the artist that comes up with it is celebrated and communicated. The airlines don't typically find some street art and say, put that on my airplane.
Yeah, it's interesting how this happened because having worked with airlines and knowing a little bit about liveries, there is a lot of legal review of all of these things.
Unless there isn't.
Unless there isn't. What's interesting is that the Guardian article says that court documents reviewed by the Guardian stated that the artist contacted the airline. The airline said, oops, and then took down the livery. So I can only imagine how much that cost.
Took down the livery? Did they repaint it, or
they removed the livery?
Ooh,
yeah.
So I guess they couldn't come to an agreement on some monetary compensation for the unauthorized use of that art.
Yeah. So it was painted on the aircraft in fall of 2024. And by December of 2024, that aircraft the livery had been removed.
Oof.
So not good. And I can only imagine someone at AirAsia Malaysia is not necessarily in the good graces of their boss.
Yes. Aircraft paint, especially for an entire livery like that, does not come cheap.
No. Jason.
Yes.
The day has finally come almost 25/28 here.
Oh, what are we talking about?
Only a decade late, but Lufthansa is able to finally almost sort of sell the seats that it put on the airplanes that weren't certified, but they put on the airplanes anyway. And then they had to not sell the seats. But now they can sell most of the seats, but not all of the seats.
Yes, we've talked to John Walton about this in the past, how Lufthansa put these seats on board at 787-9 and due to certification reasons could only sell 4 of the, 28 seats on board,
yep.
Which is not good for revenue. So they said, we're going to send it to like Toronto where no one will notice or care, which is, I don't know, not great for Toronto. But they finally got certification for most of the seats on board, but still not all. There are still 4 seats on board that aircraft that they cannot sell, but this is a non-rev bonanza right now, I'd imagine, where suddenly an entire business class cabin that could not be sold until it can be sold is up for grabs. So, hey, congrats, Lufthansa, your already out-of-date product is ready to be set in.
Yes. So this is just the 787. So that is now moving forward. Let's run through a couple of quick things and then we will be done with the episode. Jason, we just talked about how much we love special liveries and we've got a good one.
We've
got a really good one. A new one, and it's really, really good.
Oh, this one. Yes. I've never flown Brussels Airlines. I have no affinity to Brussels Airlines, except for their special liveries, which always, they just knock it out of the park. But what would they do this time?
Very good. They have a new Tintin livery. And as a big Tintin fan, I'm always excited when they do these. So this particular livery features Tintin in a spacesuit and the moon, and includes Captain Haddock as well. And then on the underside, they have the rocket, which Tintin uses to get to the moon. So in Tintin lore, Tintin is actually the first person to walk on the face of the moon, along with Captain Haddock and Snowy. And as we all know, this is obviously true. And so Brussels decided that they were going to put a livery together. So I think it's fantastic.
Yes. And
really
I love that
nice to look at.
Brussels Airlines, they always go a little step above just painting the outside because the interior is also Tintin space themed as well.
Yes.
Which is fantastic. Brussels always goes above and beyond. I know with their Tomorrowland liveries, and this is not the first Tintin livery they have, but they always put it on the inside too.
It's not the first Tintin livery they've done, and it's also not the first Tintin livery they currently have, because what they decided to do with the existing Tintin livery, which is the Shark submarine, is leave it until the aircraft leaves service. So it's going to be around for the next few years. So that's I think a very good decision.
Fantastic.
The Shark will be around until 2027, and that one's called Rackham. And that'll be around until it'll be a 25-year-old A320ceo at that point when it leaves the fleet for good. So very cool stuff. Have a look at the photos and try and catch it if you can, if it's flying, in Europe where you live. Elsewhere at the moment, there's a Cessna that has finally left Antarctica.
Oh, there aren't many Cessnas there to begin with.
There sure aren't. So this is the aircraft that was piloted by teenager Ethan Goh, who was flying around the world in order to raise money for cancer research. And he was supposed to be flying out of Punta Arenas for Ushuaia and diverted, made his way.
Was diverted, I think.
Yeah, found himself landing at King George Island. Chilean authorities were not happy. They said that he was an unauthorized landing and kept him in detention for months. He was allowed to leave last August. And as part of the satisfaction of his legal filings, he had to pay $30,000. He had to meet certain conditions, and he is not allowed to set foot in Chile for 3 years. So a ferry pilot earlier this week flew out the aircraft from Antarctica up to Punta Arenas and then on to Santiago. I believe the aircraft will then make its way from Santiago into Argentina, where Ethan will continue his journey around the world.
Oh, nice to hear.
Good luck to him. Yeah. And hopefully he can not run afoul of authorities this time around.
Yes, that would be a very wise idea. But hey, good to know that at the end of the day, the end of the saga, the aircraft made it out at some point, because sometimes that's not the fate, and the aircraft just gets crushed into a cube.
Oh, that didn't happen this time, and off it goes. Jason, we love a good investment opportunity, don't we?
Yeah, but since we've been recording this, gone out and bought a couple Spirit A320s, Neos, because
there you go.
I've learned so much.
But have you heard that you might be able to invest in the new Pakistan International Airlines?
I decline this generous offer, thank you. I have heard many pitches on things I should invest in. I will not be contributing any of my multiple dollars to this investment opportunity, but thank you.
So what this is...
a bad idea.
The new owners of PIA are planning to list between 5 and 10% of the airline as a way to raise money in a public offering. And that seems like a great way to not have money anymore.
You too can own 5 to 10% of the world's worst airline.
If you're interested, it sounds like this will be possibly coming to a PIA near you. I was thinking about this earlier today as I was working on the show notes. Do you think this would be a better or worse investment than Baltia?
I would take Baltia 10 times out of 10 over this. Because at least with Baltia, they're going to keep you going for decades. They're going to keep giving you hope that next week we're going to fly. Next week, our 747-200 is going to fly from JFK to St. Petersburg. PIA is nothing but despair and just failure. Baltia has never failed. They just haven't achieved greatness yet.
They just haven't succeeded yet. Fair enough.
Is that Ponzi scheme still a thing, or are we done?
No. I think somebody ended up being charged with something, and then it was just over. And the FAA finally was like, all right, we're done with you guys.
Oh, too bad.
One day, I really hope, and I really don't want it to have to be me, because I don't really have the time for this, but I really hope somebody writes a book on Baltia.
Somebody should.
I went down the rabbit hole. For those that don't know what we're talking about, there was a group of investors that somehow managed to convince enough people to pony up some cash so that they could purchase an actual 747-200. And they had the airplane.
Two. They had two.
Yes, one and then the other. So it wasn't like they bought two. They bought one and then that one didn't work out and then they bought another one. But what happened was they basically kept saying the initial idea was we're going to fly from New York to St. Petersburg, Russia, and it'll be this amazing experience. We'll use a 747-200 and it'll be great. And they said all the right things. They did all the right things. And it became very clear to anyone who wasn't emotionally or financially invested that this was probably not a legitimate business venture. And just years and years and years went by. And by the time I had gotten really into aviation and had begun my aviation journalism career, I was super invested in the Baltia story. And so I went down the rabbit hole of financial filings and legal frameworks and all sorts of good fun stuff. And it just, every new piece of paper, it became more and more clear that this was never going to happen.
No.
And the FAA finally realized that as well a few years back and said, we're done with you guys. And then I think the SEC got involved as well somewhere. So it was, oh man.
I'm sad to see that's gone. Kind of, sort of, but way back when they offered me a job so long ago. But it wasn't really a job because it was contingent on we don't really have money right now, so we can't pay
Did they want you to pay? Was it one of those you do the work and then give us money?
Well, it was kind of like that. It was basically, we can't really pay you right now, but when we start operating flights, we can pay you. And I was like, no, thank you. But that was very much the operation. There were people actually doing that, taking them up on that, and thinking any day now. No, it was a Ponzi scheme.
Rough.
You were working for a Ponzi scheme. A really cool Ponzi scheme, because most Ponzi schemes don't have any tangible assets. This one had 2 747-200s in Michigan, which even appeared at air shows. So,
Yeah.
there's that. Man, I didn't expect to be talking about Baltia today.
No one expects to ever be talking about Baltia, and yet here they find themselves. All right. We'll maybe come back to that in a future episode if we can ever find the time to really give it the proper, I can't believe this was actually a thing treatment it deserves. But until then, and until next week, this has been episode 358 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here, as always, with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.